back to the CNBC Africa's coverage of the ECTO Technology Day, where we are looking at fostering governance with technology. Dr. Silvanus earlier mentioned that they are not allowing telcos to share information with third parties. But one can get the sense that by trying to make sure you secure that data, you make that data less useful because it could be useful to other users. So I want to get your thoughts about data sharing and how that can work practically and still keep the data secure.
What big data analytics would help the government as well as other agencies is there are regular patterns that you can track. Okay, if any pattern that you notice which is beyond the ordinary, okay, then we can focus and find out if there is any terrorism activity or any crime or any fraud is happening. So this data sharing, okay, with the government, with the relevant agencies, will help to prevent national disasters. So I believe that data sharing is very key, like Prof mentioned.
There are rules for sharing personal identity information. What I have stated is that third-party data, that is, such personal identity information, cannot be shared with third parties. But there are ground rules whereby such can be shared. I gave an instance of gaining access to call data record of a subscriber, which is held by a telco service provider, for instance.
Right.
That before a third party can gain access to that data, you need to get appropriate authority to authorize that access.
All right.
It's not that you don't share, we share.
Christabel, can you just share your experience in terms of data sharing and how that can work practically?
What we have tried to do is to kind of create a data warehouse whereby it's important that week on week, we have even identified the frequency in terms of reporting that is sharing with the industry. We kind of try to analyze our service clients who are major stakeholders, not just the banking sector, even other stakeholders in the e-space. So what we do typically is to churn out reports, mostly Mondays. Every week we try to send out these reports. For the bank MDs, they receive these reports mostly Mondays by 10 a.m. and it talks through the efficiency of most of their channels, you know, how they're being assessed by their customers. So you find typically for the POS, the ATM, currently the mobile payments, they're able to assess, and of course the internet, they're able to assess what they have as statistics for which they can even advise or maybe take better decisions within the typical management. So we share this with the public. Again, it's not about data to the public. We would like to know, for those we would not typically share data, there's something we define, you know, what is sensitive and not so sensitive documentation. So for that, there are some that we'll share with the telecommunication industry and those that will be shared maybe for training centers like FITC. As it were, what we try to do for the industry is to be able to begin to even grow the data. I mean, we say we're in the nascent stages now. Most of the transactions that we see are those that are integrated to our platform. So we're growing our data. So far, at least NIPS, we can say we have an 18-year-old documentation on most of the data or transactions that have passed through us. So we want to see for the future where we will begin to analyze more, like the pattern, because it's about security. What becomes circumspect? What becomes treasury into the system? Right. And for now, we're able to identify most of that and again, like share that with the industry. We meet with them intermittently to talk through them.
Swell, you want to make a contribution to this?
There is one concept in the big data which is called dark data, which means...
You say card data?
Dark data.
Dark data.
Yes.
Okay.
This is something which we feel is not relevant at the moment, but it is definitely is of relevance in the future. For example, in the past, organizations, especially in the retail industry, they never used to come to a consumer. But nowadays, whatever your preferences are being tracked, and they are able to do personalized marketing. So when we share data, there are some components which are dark data which are being shared with external agencies which may not be relevant at the moment, but in the future, when there are technologies, when there are analytics that are developed, they will become relevant. So we should also take care of that.
All right, I want to bring you back in. Oh, you want to make a comment?
The whole thing about data and data security is an extremely central and important topic for the development of this country. You know, it has huge implications for financial management, revenue collection, security, disaster management, environment. It has implications like credit management, transactions, trade, and so on and so forth. It has implications that cut across international everything. Data is behind, but it's so important for the development of the country. And I think, I'm going back to my old point,
right,
that we need to step up in the area of regulatory and legal compliance and enforcement.
All right.
I want to see a situation, you know, he said something about, you know, if some people are not sure about the integrity of, about the fact that the data they will provide will be secure, they wouldn't give it. We want to see a situation for which, you know, there are compliance measures, there are compliance standards, for which those who do not keep those standards, for which when there's a defaulting, there are prison terms, there are jail terms, there are tax fines, so that if you hold a position and you're supposed to ensure that this data, you know, goes through these standards, is secure, and so on and so forth, and that is not done, and there's a breach, there's abuse, there's compromise, such persons must be held responsible, must go to jail, must pay tax fines.
My personal experience, what I find is a lot of spam mail. There's a lot of fraud involved in how data is managed in Nigeria right now. So let me hear from you.
I will go back to the issue of big data itself. One of the very critical phases of the life cycle of big data is data discovery and classification. If you do your data classification appropriately, that is where you define the type of data and the characteristics of that data in terms of who should gain access to it, what that data should be used for, and the level of exposure, then you will be able to apply the necessary security mechanisms to the platform that stores that particular data and to who gains access to it and for what purpose.
So perhaps there should be rules for that,
yes,
defining that infrastructure.
The NCC has published a regulation, a framework called Technical and Legal Framework for Cyber and Information Security. In that framework, particularly in the legal framework, we defined what is to be done with data that you have collected, how you administer the data. If there are violations, the compliance measures that will be taken. You know, the Nigerian Communications Commission only regulates the telecoms industry, and our framework, we hope, will be adopted by other industry stakeholders that has something to do with data. For example, NCC is in the forefront of preaching for the provision of private data policy in Nigeria.
So I think you have made an interesting point about the NCC making suggestions for the broader ICT sector. Perhaps that's something that we need to look at, having a very broad-based view of security in ICT in Nigeria. Do you think we're seeing enough of that? Jeff, maybe you want to comment on that. I know you wanted to make another point.
You know, I don't think these things are sort of fixed points. I think these evolve over time. And as a good example, which we were just talking about, classifying data, having rules and requirements about classifying data and how it can be used. I think that makes a lot of sense. However, I think it's important to recognize that that's not fixed forever. That classification needs to be revisited regularly. And I think that's true with any sort of security standards and governance, is it constantly needs to be revisited. Because, for example, in how you classify data and who can access it, you may have a different decision about access over time. Innovative new ways to use that data that an old classification might not allow, a different kind of person, maybe not even outside government or a different kind of business, figuring out a new way to use that data or analyze that big data set. You've got to be able to revisit those classifications periodically so that you're actually allowing the innovation that access enables.
It was very interesting yesterday that the minister made mention of the comprehensive harmonized cybersecurity bill that is going to be presented to the House as an executive bill. I was a member of the team that drew up that particular bill in 2011. We made a submission to the federal government in November 2011, and it is only now that is going to go to National Assembly. If that bill is passed, even a systems administrator in a college or in any establishment will have to watch over his or her back, because you have what is called limits of your engagement. The fact that you can look at person's email doesn't mean that you have to do it without consequence. Now, if you go to scam mail, for the Nigerian Communications Commission, I would say we'll give ourselves a pat on the back. Because as far back as 2011, operators, if they are here in the room, they will testify to that we went around and instructed them to install, mail filtering and SMS filtering mechanisms. And for the majority of them, they have. But there is one thing you must understand. Scam mails can come in various forms. It could be an automated computer sending emails, or it could be a human being sending emails to real addresses. And there is a limit that there is no software in the world that will give you 100% filtration.
States at their level having policies and regulations in place on data protection is a good thing, but it doesn't remove a lot of the basic risk of this, which is, in fact, a lot of the value of data is combining it with other data. And so if you have state data which is complying with data protection standards mixed with other data and analyzed with other data that is not bound by those requirements, you end up having security at the weakest link. I mean, it ends up being the weakest link is the level of security you're really working at. And if the weakest link is no data protection standards in place, that ends up being the security risk even for state-level data.
I've significantly run over the time for this panel. Of course, we have been at this CNBC special presentation of the Edo Technology Day. We have been talking about security implications of big data. That's where we leave it. I'm Wale Famrewa. Thank you for joining us.